Hello everyone and welcome to the continuation of the structure of a CNN. Next up in line is padding. Padding essentially refers to adding extra pixels to an image. Now, why exactly do we need padding? There are two main reasons. The first one being, after multiple convolutions, the image shrinks down, eventually rendering it useless. The second reason is, during convolution, the pixels at the corners get covered only once, whereas pixels in the middle get covered multiple times. This is what I meant by my second point. As you can see, the pixel highlighted in green gets filtered only once, whereas the pixel highlighted red gets filtered multiple times. Now this leads to loss of information of the green pixel relative to the red pixel. A solution to this is to pad the image. Now, in this picture, you can see that the boundary is filled with pixels which have values 0. What we did was add an extra layer of zeros along the boundary of the image. The pixels on the corners are now filtered multiple times, so there is no loss of information leading to high accuracy. But you will notice that the output dimension is equal to the input dimension, and hence you have the name same. Now, when there is no padding, it is often known as valid padding. Now, the activation layer. So far, all our computations have been linear. That is, it's either been multiplication, addition, or some form of a linear combination. The outer layer captures basic features, whereas the deeper layers capture high-level features in our CNN model. Now, with linear mapping, the high-level generalization won't be possible in the deeper layers. So, the whole concept of activation introduces non-linearity. So, ReLu is preferred. Now, what is ReLu? ReLu essentially stands for the rectified linear unit. Now, the reason it is preferred is because of its high accuracy, which eventually leads to much faster training. Now, we have the pooling layer. Now, what is pooling, right? So, the input matrix often contains information that is not valuable to the CNN. So, larger number of parameters are there to learn, which implies that you require a higher computation. This also results in the network being too sensitive. So to solve this issue, we take the important features that are actually essential, and then we discard the rest. So a question that might pop up in your mind is, how do we know which features to keep and which to discard? In the short answer is we don't. So we take a group of pixels and perform aggregation. Now the aggregation can either be a maximum aggregation or average aggregation. Now this is an example of max pooling. Essentially what we are doing is we have a filter which is a 2x2 max pooling layer. This helps us divide our input image into 2x2 chunks. And from each chunk, we take the pixel which has the highest activation. In our pink subsection, 54 is the pixel with the highest activation. That is retained. In the next one, it is 221. In the next one, it is 253. And in the next section, it is 119. So only these pixels are retained in the output feature. Everything else is disregarded for the next few convolutions. This is because we are doing max pooling. So in the place of max pooling, if we had average pooling, we would be taking the average of all the pixels in our subsection, and that would be used for further convolutions. Now, this is an example of what exactly is happening during max pooling. We have our input image, which goes through max pooling, and now we have our output image. But as you can notice, the vertical edges are still retained, but we have cut down on the number of parameters that the computer would actually have to go through, which implies lesser computational power that we actually need, which is good for both parties. Now, putting it all together, we saw that the different components of a single convolution layer are the convolution, then we have the padding, we have activation layer, and then the pooling layer. Now, multiple such convolution layers are put together, leading to feature extractions. After that, we go into something called the fully connected layer. Now, the fully connected layer is a feed-forward network. The input is the flattened output of the final convolution layer. It acts exactly like a multi-level perceptron. The final layer uses softmax activation. The softmax function gives the probabilities of the input being in a particular class. Now, this will be more clear in the next few slides, but essentially, if you have output neurons corresponding to different types of numbers, and say your input image was the number 4, so then the neuron corresponding to 4 will have the highest activation, if trained correctly, that is, and will help you predict your output correctly. Now, the number of output neurons is equal to the number of classes. Now, I used the term flattening. What exactly is flattening, right? So, the final convolution layer returns a 3-dimensional matrix, right? The dimensions of the matrix being the height, the depth, and the channels. But the input to the fully connected layer should be a vector of dimension height times depth times channel, 1, which basically means it's a column matrix. Now, this is an example of what exactly happens. So you have an input image, which is an image of a car. It goes through convolution layers and then goes into a fully connected layer. And as you can notice, the output neuron corresponding to the class car gets activated the most, whereas the other neurons, which corresponds to truck, airplane, ship, and horse, doesn't get activated as much. Hence, our predicted output of this image is a car, which is correct. And hence, we can also say that our particular CNN model has been trained correctly. Now, this brings us to the end of this video. Check the other videos in the playlist to learn more about CNNs.